Good morning, welcome to IndyCar on the 29th of January. The BBC in Scotland, in fact the BBC generally across the UK, has been, I would say, very remiss in misreporting a number of things recently. But the most notable one, I think, comes in an article today in The National, in which the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, refutes the claim that Scotland's funding for the United Nations mission in Gaza, the humanitarian mission in Gaza, had been stopped due to evidence coming to the fore that some members of the United Nations team in Gaza had been involved in the attacks on Israel. Now, before we start sort of getting polarised about this, I think it's important to note that the amount of funding which the Scottish Government is actually able to give is relatively small. As far as I can understand it, it's about £750,000. It's not even £1 million. And that is limited actually by the United Kingdom Government in what the Scottish Government is allowed to spend on overseas aid and giving money to charitable organisations abroad for this kind of work. But according to the First Minister, this funding was never stopped at all, and in fact the BBC misreported the entire thing, conflating the Scottish government and the English government together in this pool, saying that funding had been suspended because of this breaking news story. So it's not true, and the BBC has quietly adjusted its reporting of this particular topic to include this new detail, claiming that they make such adjustments as new information comes to the fore. Now, that information would already have been there had they bothered looking for it in the first place. Now, the BBC's continued misinformation campaign and misrepresentation of Scotland within the Union continued with Laura Keunssberg's recent programme, in which she assembled 50 voters in the studio, claiming that this was, and I quote, Britain in a room. Now, it's been revealed that none of these voters, none of these 50 people that were assembled in Laura Keunssberg's programme studio were in fact either Scottish, Welsh or from Northern Ireland. So it wasn't so much Britain in a room as England in a room. And yet she is allowed to get away with this misrepresentation, claiming that these people represented the people of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is obviously not true. Again, the second not true thing that the BBC has done in the last few days. Now, moving on to something which is true, and I reported the other day that the proposal to restart a ferry between Rosyth in Scotland and Dunkirk in the northern coast of France recently has come unstuck due to a lack of funding. But it's also been revealed in the National today that the level of that funding, the amount of money required, is actually relatively small. The consortium concerned with starting this new ferry route has said that they need just £10 million to build the terminal infrastructure at Rosyth in order to service this new ferry route. Now, that's not a colossal amount of money, and in fact in normal times the Scottish Government would have been able to provide such funding. So I wonder why they're unable to do it at the moment. It could be that they have spent everything in their budget so far, it could be some other reason, but it doesn't seem like a great deal of money which is tripping up this current proposal. And it may well be that that funding is found in the next few days in time to rescue this new ferry route and actually make sure that it begins, because it is simply a case of buildings and infrastructure on the quayside. It's nothing to do with the ferry itself, it's nothing to do with the route or the operating costs of running the ferry. It is all down to buildings and construction. So I'm hoping that they do find this funding, and that whether they get this through the usual channels of looking for investment, or whether the Scottish Government is able to at least provide some of it so that the work can be started while other sources of funding are looked for, I don't know, but I'm hoping that will be the case. Now, in other news, it's come to light today that Boris Johnson, when he was the Prime Minister, and during the lockdown, in which we know that Boris Johnson's office and much of his staff were partying on while the rest of us suffered, it's been revealed today that Boris Johnson spent somewhere in the region of £7,500 of public money not on anything to do with governing the country, not even to do with the wallpaper on his flat, but simply for alcohol. £7,500 worth of alcohol for his own workforce. It's a remarkable piece of information. It just goes to show you how much money was wasted during the COVID lockdown so that Boris's chums and his staffers could all party on while the rest of us suffered COVID lockdowns and people were separated from one another at critical times. And finally, the poll results of an UNRWA poll from 4 days ago, which have been republished again today on social media, which show that 57% of us, in fact slightly more than 57% of Scots, when asked the question, said that they would support the Holyrood Parliament having the powers to both negotiate with the United Kingdom on ending the Union and also having the powers to hold a legal binding referendum on whether or not the Union should continue. Now this is interesting because it flies in the face of all the English polling which has been produced by papers like The Times in London recently and The Telegraph. All these Tory papers have been producing polls saying the exact opposite, more or less. And this goes to show you that if you ask people in Scotland what they think, you get a totally different answer than if you ask people across the entire United Kingdom, as tends to happen with United Kingdom newspaper polls. So, as usual, the BBC is lying or misrepresenting Scotland on a regular basis. Scotland has not stopped its funding to the United Nations humanitarian effort in Gaza. It continues at the low level, as I've mentioned earlier on. Laura Keunssberg has continued to misrepresent Scots as being English people in a room full of 50 English people, claiming that this is representative of Britain in a room when it plainly was not. And Boris Johnson has spent over £7,500 of our money on bevy, whilst we were all suffering during lockdown. And with 57% of us in favour of Holyrood having the powers not only to hold a referendum on independence but also to negotiate it, I think you can say that things are rather different when you look down the telescope from this end rather than from the London end. Scotland is plainly in a mood for independence, and the people want to see their own parliament in Edinburgh having the powers to do exactly that. And so it's now down to our politicians to provide a way of doing that. And I mentioned yesterday several different methods of doing exactly that. But this is a case of our right to decide our own future, our right to self-determination. And plainly, over 57% of us want that right, and we want it now. Anyway, that's it from me today. Please keep watching the programme. Thank you for continuing to watch to the end. Keep the faith, and as I said before, if you can afford to keep helping me with donations, please do so. I'm in the process of negotiating, maybe not the right word, with Facebook over some advertising during these programs which will help to support what I'm doing. It might not be the ideal method of supporting this channel, but it will certainly help, even if it is a little bit annoying to have programs broken up for adverts. But we'll see. I'll let you know if that's going to happen. In the meantime, keep the faith, and I'll see you later in the week. Bye for now.